Hello, I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. Hamas says it's exchanged hostage and prisoner lists with Israel as peace talks continue in Egypt. Hundreds of National Guard troops arrive near Chicago as Trump threatens to deploy them to US cities. And the Nobel Prize for Chemistry has been awarded to 3 scientists for their work on new materials for climate change. We begin in the Middle East, where Hamas says it has exchanged lists of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners for a swap deal as indirect talks with Israel continue in Egypt. Qatar's Prime Minister and Turkish officials are also meeting both sides for a third day of Gaza ceasefire negotiations.
Hamas said on Tuesday it was ready to reach a deal to end the war in Gaza, based on President Donald Trump's 20-point plan, but still has demands. The comment comes as peace talks continue on their third day in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh, bringing together Israeli and Hamas negotiators, aiming to end the conflict. Qatar said its Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, would attend, while Turkish state media reported the country's intelligence chief, Ibrahim Kalin, would lead a delegation to Egypt. US President Donald Trump's special Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, will also join the talks, according to Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati. The discussions are based on a 20-point peace plan proposed by Trump last month. The proposal calls for a ceasefire, the release of hostages, Israeli troop withdrawal, the disarmament of Hamas, and reconstruction in Gaza. Mediators say both Hamas and Israel have agreed on a framework and agenda, and now they will work on the details. Israel is seeking a durable ceasefire, the return of hostages, and guarantees that Hamas will be disarmed, while Gaza's reconstruction proceeds under international supervision. Hamas says its delegation is working to overcome all obstacles, demanding a permanent ceasefire, the full withdrawal of Israeli forces, unrestricted humanitarian access, the return of displaced residents, a reconstruction plan overseen by a Palestinian technocratic body, and a fair prisoner exchange deal. The talks coincide with the second anniversary of the Hamas attack on southern Israel, which resulted in close to 1,200 deaths and 251 hostages. Since then, Israeli military operations in Gaza have killed more than 67,000 people, including 18,000 children, according to Gaza health authorities. Global pressure to end the war has escalated, with much of Gaza flattened, and with the United Nations warning that famine is unfolding. Officials say the initial focus is hostage release, a step that could determine whether the path to ending the conflict becomes viable in the coming days.
Staying on Gaza, the anniversary of the war has stirred powerful emotions across the world. Let's take a look at how different cities remembered and marked the anniversary.
From Latin America to Europe, Australia to North America. People across the world marked the second anniversary of the attacks on Israel and subsequent war in Gaza, with vigils, protests, and painful memories. At the University of California in Los Angeles, dozens of demonstrators marched through the campus, carrying roses in their hands.
I know some amazing Israelis that I love to death, okay? I love them. But, you know, today is a focus for Palestine and for the people that are currently being ethnically cleansed. But my heart goes out to all of them.
In Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Argentina, pro-Palestinian marchers demanded their governments cut ties with Israel.
The entire world is already with Palestine, and we will fight to the very end, because we can't take it anymore. It doesn't only affect Palestinians, but it affects all of us who are in the struggle against them.
And in Berlin, protesters waving Palestinian flags chanted near City Hall. Local media reported around 500 demonstrators came out. Some were detained as tensions rose. But in a different part of the city, another scene was playing out. The Brandenburg Gate was illuminated with the Israeli flag, and a solemn vigil called for the release of hostages and an end to anti-Semitism. In Tel Aviv, grieving families called for the events of October 7th to be remembered.
I think the world have some forgot what Israel and what I have been through on the 7th of October, and I think in this ceremony we echoing what happened to us on that day and what cruelty looks like. I've been in my shelter with my pregnant wife and 2-year-old daughter for more than 22 hours as my brother Alon kidnapped.
And in Buenos Aires, people gathered in a park in the city center, pleading for the return of hostages still held in Gaza. Among them, 4 Argentinians.
We understand that progress is being made on a ceasefire and on a deal that would bring all the hostages back home, and that is the goal we have. Beyond everything that can be said, the main objective is that all the hostages, all our friends, brothers, are back home.
2 years on, the world remains torn, with hopes resting on informal peace talks taking place in Egypt.
Now to the US, where National Guard troops have arrived at an army training center outside Chicago. The deployment has sparked legal battles and debate over Trump's possible use of the Insurrection Act. Trump says it will help continue to control cities, but Democrats disagree.
A new wave of unrest hits the United States. President Donald Trump's move to deploy federalized National Guard troops to cities led by Democrats has sparked a wave of legal battles. Footage shows troops now stationed in Chicago, Illinois. Trump argues that his use of the troops is necessary to quell violence in Democrat-controlled cities, crack down on crime, and support his deportation initiatives.
To have a great country, you can't have crime. And we don't have crime, but we have cities where there's tremendous crime. And Chicago's one of them. And if the governor can't straighten it out, we'll straighten it out. Thanks.
The troops' arrival in the city comes after a judge rejected calls to block their deployment, which has been labeled illegal, dangerous, and unconstitutional.
Chicago will not be used as a political prop. Chicago will not be intimidated, and we will not be silent. And to our residents, know that we are fighting for you and using every legal avenue to protect your rights, dignity, and your humanity.
Resolution 590.
Under federal law, the National Guard and other military troops are generally prohibited from conducting civilian law enforcement. Trump says he could go even further, invoking the Insurrection Act if necessary. This act operates as an exception to that rule and would give troops the power to directly police and arrest people. The law allows a president to deploy military forces on US soil to quell domestic uprisings. And it's not new. Signed into law by President Thomas Jefferson in 1807, it has been used before. President George H.W. Bush was the last to use it during the deadly 1992 Los Angeles riots, where more than 50 people lost their lives. The use of this law could be seen as another step by Trump to strengthen the military's role in ensuring security in Democrat-led cities.
Staying in the US, President Donald Trump has announced on Tuesday that his administration intends to abolish several government programs as the result of the continuing government shutdown. He said that details on planned job cuts would disclose within the next 4 to 5 days. The shutdown, which began on the 1st of October, has led to hundreds of thousands of federal employees being furloughed, while others have been instructed to continue working. Global trade is set to slow down next year, according to warnings from a report from the World Trade Organization. The delayed impact of US tariffs are being blamed. The study highlights how Trump's August tariffs have impacted the world economy.
Global trade is set to slow sharply next year. That's what the World Trade Organization has predicted in its latest report, saying growth will drop from 1.8% to only 0.5%. The WTO says the decrease is down to US President Donald Trump's tariffs as the effects of the tax hikes take a hold. However, the study raised its estimation for global trade growth to 2.4%, up from 0.9% for this year. The increase is mainly due to companies shipping goods to the United States before the levies took effect, along with higher trade in artificial intelligence-related products. However, this remains below the 2.8% growth recorded last year. WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala said the outlook is less promising, but added the global trading system remains resilient.
The outlook for next year is bleaker, yes, and how concerned I am, very. I am concerned for the system. You saw what I said in my statement, that this is no time for complacency. Just because we see resilience in the system doesn't mean that we're home free, because there's so much uncertainty. And that's why we've also been very upfront with you that it's very difficult to forecast because we have these ups and downs with regard to trade policy uncertainty. So I am concerned.
Trump's tariffs have unsettled markets and created uncertainty worldwide. In August, he increased tax hikes on imports from dozens of countries. It forced major trade partners such as Switzerland, Brazil, and India rushing to negotiate better deals. The European Union agreed to a 15% duty on most of its goods exported to the United States, and some other countries continue to look elsewhere to do business.
The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has warned that Europe is facing hybrid warfare, citing recent drone incidents, damage to undersea cables, and Russian interference in elections. Speaking at the European Parliament, she said the continent must move beyond traditional defense strategies, stressing that Moscow's goal is to sow division and that Europe must respond with unity, deterrence, and resolve.
These incidents are calculated to linger in the twilight of deniability. This is not random harassment. It is a coherent and escalating campaign to unsettle our citizens, test our resolve, divide our union, and weaken our support for Ukraine. And it is time to call it by its name. This is hybrid warfare, and we have to take it very serious.
Germany will grant police the power to shoot down rogue drones, similar to the ones that had disrupted airports across Europe. Announced by the Interior Minister, the new law explicitly authorizes the police to down drones violating Germany's airspace. It comes after dozens of flights were diverted or cancelled last Friday at Munich Airport, leaving more than 10,000 passengers stranded after drone sightings. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has said he assumed Russia has been behind many of the drones flying over Germany last weekend, which the Kremlin dismissed as baseless. In France, talks led by outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu to secure support for a new budget continues. Lecornu said most parties he spoke to were willing to back the plan, but socialist leaders said they could not support it in its current form. France's Green Party insists a left-wing prime minister would be the only alternative to Macron resigning or dissolving parliament, and far-right leader Marine Le Pen has vowed to block any action by a new government and again called for Macron to dissolve parliament. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has arrived in India. He described his two-day visit as the biggest trade mission ever since Brexit, while speaking at a business event in Mumbai. Alongside him were leaders from businesses, culture and universities promoting the new UK-India trade deal agreed in July. Starmer is set to meet President Narendra Modi in New Delhi on Thursday, with both leaders aiming to implement the deal within the next year.
Obviously, this is a two-parter, if you like. We had Prime Minister Modi over to the United Kingdom earlier this year to sign the FTA, the free trade agreement that we agreed, and today is the return leg of that, if you like. That FTA is really important for us. It's the biggest deal that we've struck since we left the EU, and I think it's the biggest deal that India has ever struck, so hugely important.
The 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry has been awarded to Susumu Kitagawa, Richard Robson and Omar Yaghi for their groundbreaking development of metal organic frameworks.
Breakthrough research into metal organic frameworks has earned Susumu Kitagawa, Richard Robson and Omar Yaghi one of science's highest honours. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences says their work is revolutionising fields from medicine to clean energy.
The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award the 2025 Nobel Prize in Chemistry to Susumu Kitagawa, Kyoto University, Japan, Richard Robson, University of Melbourne, Australia, and Omar Yaghi, University of California, Berkeley, USA, for the development of metal organic frameworks.
Through their groundbreaking research, the three scientists have opened new possibilities in chemistry with wide-ranging uses in medicine, energy and materials science. Their innovations could also help tackle major global challenges, including capturing carbon dioxide to help fight climate change and reducing plastic pollution using chemistry.
So this year's laureates have found a new way to create materials that are full of tiny spaces, small enough that individual molecules can fit inside. So if you imagine a whole material made out of this, you can have molecules enter and come out of it. And the special thing is that the chemical properties of these connecting pieces, our organic molecules, can be adjusted to make different molecules feel at home. So in this case, a water molecule.
The Chemistry Nobel Prize is the third prize announced this year, following those for medicine and physics. It comes with a total of 11 million Swedish krona, roughly $1.2 million, to be shared among the winners. Since its creation in 1901 by Swedish inventor Alfred Nobel, the prizes have honoured outstanding achievements in science, literature and peace. Nobel himself was a chemist, and his work in explosives helped fund the awards that continue to recognise global innovation today.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after, we'll discuss the latest on US President Donald Trump's plan to invoke the Insurrection Act, a law authorising the president to deploy military forces on US soil. See you shortly.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
I worked as a reporter in the early days. It was a heartbreaking and violent time.
Story cementing, long and complex. I ended up in Soviet Azerbaijan. Everything was going crazy. It meant a great deal to me.
What is power? Has leadership truly evolved, or are the old rules of geopolitics still pulling the strings behind the scenes? Who is really powerful? And what makes people feel powerless? Our new series explores the secrets, strategies, and consequences of power.
Welcome back to A News. Donald Trump has once again threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act, a law authorizing the deployment of military forces on U.S. soil. This is being done to sidestep any court rulings blocking the dispatch of Guard troops into Democratic-led cities over the objections of local and state officials. But the question is, can he do that? And what will it mean for American citizens in those states? Here to help me unpack this conundrum is Daniela Mello, political scientist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
My first question, why is Trump so dedicated to sending US troops to Democratic-led cities? What's his goal and why are government officials pushing back?
Well, President Trump had as one of his campaign promises that he would bring order to the so-called sanctuary cities, cities where the police officers, the police force have committed to not cooperate with ICE agents in the pursuit of undocumented immigrants. A lot of those cities are, in fact, democratic cities in the sense that they're led by the Democratic mayors, or they're cities in states led by Democratic governors. So there is a polarizing aspect to this. Obviously, it's very much politicized by the Trump administration as his administration against the cities that are, in the president's view, overrun by crime, criminality, and where ICE agents require, in the president's view, extra help from federal troops, from the National Guard, to be deployed to the cities to help them basically carry out their duties of apprehending undocumented migrants. This, of course, has been a source of much contention within the United States, and many governors, particularly the governor of California, of Oregon, and now of Illinois, have basically sued the federal government, arguing that, in fact, the president doesn't have the ability to do this. The president has mentioned that the cities are overrun by insurrectionists, has called some of the cities war zones, and has tried to justify the federal intervention in the cities under those loaded terms. Basically, what the governors are arguing is that, in fact, there's an overreach of executive power and the infringement of federal power on states' rights. Obviously, the United States administration claims exactly the contrary. So we have two competing narratives about what is legal and what is not legal, and what's justifiable under the powers that are accorded both to the states and to the federal government. It's a fight that is likely going to be resolved in the courts. The courts seem to be leaning towards the argument of states like Oregon and Illinois and California. But if the courts decide that way, the president still has one tool in his pocket, and that tool is the Insurrection Act.
Thank you for explaining that. And do you think that he could actually move to use that at all?
President Trump had already threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act during his first term, following the George Floyd demonstrations, and he never did it. But in this term, he seems to be preparing the ground, in fact, to justify that. And why do I say that? The person that is widely understood to be closer to the president and to be the true architect of this strategy is Stephen Miller. And Stephen Miller gave an interview to CNN a few days ago that was highly polemic, to say the least, because he basically argued that the president should, in fact, invoke the Insurrection Act, which is an exception to a law, another act from the 19th century called the Posse Act, that basically bars the military from participating in law enforcement activities. If the president chooses to use this exception, there's little jurisprudence on the issue of whether or not he can be stopped, even by the courts, because the president has a great level of deference in the law in defining whether or not there's a rebellion or an insurrection at work. So we are in somewhat untested grounds here, because the Insurrection Act has been used very few times in American history, in part because, again, the existence of a number of checks, like the Posse Act, forbidding the military for being used to, for instance, apprehend people on the streets. That's supposed to be done by the local police, by the state police. And in 1992, the last time that the Insurrection Act was used was by not George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, during the Rodney
King.
Rodney King, thank you very much. During the Rodney King riots that erupted in LA, and it was only done after the governor of California actually asked for the president to intervene with his forces. So basically what I'm saying is that there's a tradition, though not necessarily a hard set of laws, right? But there's a tradition in American democracy to keep the federal military, to use an intervention of the federal government at arm's distance, basically away, unless they are requested by the government. This is not a rule, but it has been the norm. President Trump has, of course, breached these norms, and in fact, given the language that both Stephen Miller and the president have been used over the past few weeks, declaring that the people showing up, the activists showing up to protest, even when they're being nonviolent, are being treated and called, quote, terrorists, insurgents. Yes, it seems quite plausible that, in fact, there's an entire justification that is being built by the administration to build up to the Insurrection Act.
Yes, and some say that this boils down to Trump's immigration enforcement goals. Is there any truth in that as well?
I mean, that's certainly how the president is presenting it, right? I mean, the president's most popular policy is immigration. That's the one issue in which polls continue to show that being tough on immigration, deporting undocumented migrants, deporting criminals, continues to be largely supported by the American public. Over 50% of the American public consistently favors this policy. So, I mean, I think there's a context here in which the president knows that this is popular, so he's pushing the envelope, particularly on this issue, because it's a winning issue for the MAGA movement and thus for the president.
And why is this such a controversial topic for Americans? And what will this mean for the future of democracy?
That's a very big question. It's deeply problematic when we start seeing in a democracy a president politicize the use of the military, and a president giving speeches to the Navy or to the top-ranking officers of the armed forces in the United States, as in the past few days, in which the president uses a deeply bipartisan discourse and politicizes that discourse and mentions using the army or training the army in American cities. It's hard not to see a threat there. It's hard not to see the potential for abuse of power when the president politicizes the use of the military internally. And again, the president often refers to this enemy from within that the military could help eradicate from American cities led by Democrats. So this is the type of discourse that we see in autocracies, that we see in dictatorships. It's a very thin line between exercising the power of the president within the law and overreaching and normalizing that the military should be in American cities and that military should be partisan to the wishes of the president, when the military in the United States
Mello, very
has
quickly,
traditionally...
Does he have the right to use it, though? President Trump does have the right to use it. That's under his jurisdiction.
That's basically right. So the president has the right to do it under the Insurrection Act, because the Insurrection Act is, in fact, an exception to the Posse Act that bans the military from being deployed. And it's an exception that doesn't put a lot of barriers, that basically leaves it up to the president to decide whether or not there is, in fact, a rebellion or an insurrection that needs to be put down by or put out by the use of the military. However, and this needs to be said, that the judge in Oregon that issued a decision that forbade the administration from deploying troops in Portland basically argued that having a great level of deference in deciding whether or not this is an insurrection is not the equivalent as making up facts. So it's to be seen whether or not the judges and the courts will stand up to President Trump in the case that he decides to, in fact, use this power.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me and for your insights, Ms. Mello. Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. First, turning to Iran, where Tehran and Washington have reportedly been in direct contact and are expected to resume the stalled talks over Iran's nuclear program. Our Taraji Shirelilu has more from Tehran.
The Kuwaiti newspaper Al Jarida says that Iran and the United States could possibly be restarting nuclear negotiations. It says that the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff have reportedly established contact several times. The report said the latest conversation between the two negotiators occurred last Saturday evening, apparently agreeing on the need to return to the negotiating table. However, Araghchi denied the report, which said that secret preparatory meetings could be held next week in Oman or Qatar to coordinate before officially resuming the stalled talks. Araghchi also said in a post on X that he rejected allegations by US President Donald Trump when he said that Iran had been after nuclear weapons. Araghchi believes the comment was said to justify attacking Iran's civilian nuclear centers on the 22nd of June. He said that if Trump had read the minute submediated talks recorded by the Omani interlocutor, he would see just how close both sides were to celebrating an historic Iran nuclear deal. Tehran has also condemned Trump's renewed threat to strike Iran if it restores nuclear enrichment, saying it would be an admission of war crime. The unconfirmed report comes after the pre-2015 United Nations nuclear sanctions were reimposed when France, Germany, and the UK referred their dispute with Iran to the Security Council. Iranian lawmakers are demanding the foreign ministry lower Tehran's diplomatic relations with the European Troika, saying their move against Iran was meant to secure US support for Ukraine. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A-News TV.
Senior Italian defense officials have toured the facilities of Turkey's leading drone manufacturer, Baykar, in what analysts see as a signal of growing defense cooperation. The visit included live demonstrations of Baykar's cutting-edge combat aircraft.
Senior Italian defense officials witnessed live demonstrations of advanced combat drones during a tour of Turkey's Baykar defense company. The visit is seen as growing cooperation between the two NATO allies. The Italian delegation, led by Deputy Defense Minister Matteo Perejo di Cremnago, brought together top military officials, including the commanders of Italy's Air Force and Army, a deputy naval commander, and executives from Leonardo, Italy's state-controlled defense giant. Their visit covered two key sites: Baykar's flight training center in Çorlu in Turkey's Tekirdağ province, and the company's main headquarters at the Özdemir Baykar Central Technology Center in Istanbul. At the Çorlu facility, Italian officials witnessed coordinated flight demonstrations featuring three of Baykar's flagship unmanned systems: the Bayraktar TB3, the larger Akıncı, and the Kızıl Elma, described as an unmanned fighter aircraft. The delegation was accompanied by Turkey's defense industry chief Haluk Görgün, who heads the country's defense industry agency, alongside Baykar chairman Selçuk Bayraktar and CEO Haluk Bayraktar. Analysts say the visit underscores growing synergy between Turkish and Italian defense sectors and could pave the way for new joint ventures and technology partnerships within NATO's defense framework.
The 7th Moscow format meeting on Afghanistan has concluded in Russia. Participants stressed that any foreign military presence in Afghanistan or neighboring countries is unacceptable and would undermine regional peace and stability. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more.
At the end of the Moscow format meeting on Afghanistan, delegates urged nations most responsible for Afghanistan's current situation to meet their commitments to the country's reconstruction and future development. They reaffirmed support for Afghanistan as an independent, united and peaceful state and called for stronger regional cooperation against terrorism. Participants said Afghanistan should be assisted in eliminating terrorism so its territory does not threaten neighboring countries. They also opposed the politicization of humanitarian aid and underlined the need for continued support to the Afghan people. Afghanistan's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi told reporters that the country is free and independent, and that any military presence is unacceptable to Afghans and the region. He said narcotics cultivation has stopped and that no unauthorized armed groups, including Daesh, are active inside Afghanistan, though challenges remain beyond its borders. On the sidelines, Muttaqi met Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to discuss closer political and economic ties. He also held talks with Pakistan's Special Representative Mohammad Sadiq, focusing on trade, transit, and regional security. Both sides agreed on continued dialogue to counter terrorism and ensure secure transport routes. Regional powers including Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asian states reiterated their shared goal: a stable, self-reliant, and peaceful Afghanistan at the heart of Asia. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
A new stage of regional development is being launched in Karakoram, Pakistan. According to the government's latest plans, 27 large-scale projects worth nearly $2 billion will be implemented across key sectors of the region's economy. Savel Rajapova has more from Tashkent.
The Comprehensive Development Program for Karakoram, Pakistan envisions 27 investment and infrastructure projects with a total value of around $2 billion. The initiative aims to accelerate socio-economic growth in the region and create around 10,000 new jobs. Projects will cover vital areas such as gas supply, road construction, logistics, agriculture, industry, and healthcare. Authorities say the program will help improve living standards, modernize infrastructure, and expand access to public services. This effort is part of the broader Karakoram, Pakistan Regional Development Program, which targets steady economic growth of 6 to 6.5% per year. It also includes plans to attract between $150 and $200 million in forward and performance-based financing. Over the past 2 years, 64 investment projects have already been completed, generating more than 5,000 jobs. The newly announced phase represents a continuation of these efforts, focusing on industrial expansion, support for small businesses, and the introduction of new technologies in agriculture. Uzbekistan claims that the program will not only enhance the region's economic potential, but also strengthen its overall resilience and ensure balanced development across Uzbekistan, contributing to greater national cohesion and unity. It is Sevil Rajapov reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Strict security measures are now in place in Dushanbe ahead of major international meetings. Leaders from CIS and Central Asian countries, including President Vladimir Putin, are gathering in the city. What does this mean for the region, and will Moscow reposition itself within Central Asia? Fariza Kalimazana explains.
From October 8th to 12th, Dushanbe is under heightened security as it hosts a series of high-level events, including the CIS summit, a Central Asia-Russia meeting, and President Vladimir Putin's first state visit to Tajikistan in years. Markets are closed, prayers suspended, and residents urged to limit travel. Leaders of 8 CIS countries will meet on October 10th to discuss regional security, economic cooperation, and humanitarian issues. The spotlight, however, is on Russia's talks with Central Asian leaders, focusing on counterterrorism and cross-border threats, with a joint statement expected. The meetings come amid Russia's war in Ukraine and growing sanctions pressure. Analysts say Moscow is seeking to reinforce its presence in Central Asia as competition from China, the European Union, Turkey, and Gulf states intensifies. And recent Central Asia-China and Central Asia-EU meetings brought pledges of multi-billion-dollar investments, highlighting Russia's limited economic leverage in the region. Fariza Kalimurzana, Almaty, A News.
Now to a short break. After, we'll discuss the upcoming CIS Heads of State Summit and Central Asian Leaders meeting in Tajikistan. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Orkun Amashov. Welcome to Dialogue of Civilizations. No man is an island entire of itself. Our true connections as species go far beyond digital technology. In this exciting new series, I'll be exploring a vast and fascinating history of connections between civilizations and revealing secret bonds that have helped societies, cultures and religions peacefully coexist. Join me and let's explore together.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back to A News. Now, world leaders will be landing in Tajikistan tomorrow for high-level talks. Russia and Central Asian leaders will meet on Friday to discuss regional cooperation and security, with Afghanistan's worsening situation expected to dominate the summit agenda, and also the CIS leaders meeting on Thursday. Here to delve deeper into this topic is political analyst Nikola Mikovic. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invite.
My first question is, Russian President Vladimir Putin will be at the summit. What does he hope to gain out of that?
I think he aims to continue creating an illusion that he has friends in the post-Soviet space, which is essentially not true because virtually all post-Soviet countries seek to distance themselves from the Kremlin to develop closer ties with other actors, with the European Union, the United States, China, and Turkey. But nevertheless, it will be a great opportunity for pro-Kremlin propagandists to portray the event as a significant summit, because Putin met with leaders from former Soviet republics, and as I said, they will try to create an illusion that Russia has friends in the post-Soviet space. So from the propaganda aspect, it will be a very important summit, but in reality, I see it merely as a Russian attempt to preserve remnants of its influence in the post-Soviet space, which Russia is rapidly losing, and it's the result not only of its adventure in Ukraine, but also of its diplomacy over the past 25 years since Putin has been in power in the Kremlin in Russia. Moscow effectively lost its influence in Central Asia and the South Caucasus, not to mention Georgia and Ukraine. So this is just an attempt to save at least some of its influence in those countries, especially when it comes to energy and economy, because energy was traditionally a major driver of the Russian foreign policy. So I think that will be one of the topics, the key topics that they will discuss, except Afghanistan that you mentioned.
Definitely. And just on the points that you raised, why is Moscow losing its influence in Central Asian countries and the South Caucasus?
Well, one of the reasons I think is because it demonstrated serious weakness in Ukraine. And there are many aspects as well. For instance, Russia is doing absolutely nothing to strengthen its soft power in the region, unlike other countries that are doing that, other actors as well, the European Union and the United States especially. China, on the other hand, is increasing its economic cooperation with the region, but Russia has nothing to offer to those countries. It can offer its market, labor market, to countries such as Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, but to others, well, nothing special except security to a certain degree. But this adventure in Ukraine has demonstrated that Russia is very weak, both militarily and diplomatically. So, of course, all these actors now seek to develop closer ties with other actors and possibly even military alliances and military ties with other actors, not necessarily with NATO, but maybe with countries such as Japan, China, and so on. So they all have their own interests in the region, and they will seek to benefit Russia's very weak position in the international arena, and to, of course, to strengthen their influence in the strategically important region of Central Asia.
Okay, in that sense, do you think that the summit will help Russia to consolidate regional partnerships?
To a certain degree, maybe in the short term, but in the long term, I think Russia's positions in Central Asia will depend on the outcome of the Ukraine war. But according to the situation on the ground, Russia is not making any significant progress, which means that it does not have a serious chance to win the war. And if it suffers a defeat in Ukraine, of course, it will have an impact on Central Asia, because virtually all of its allies will turn their back on Moscow. And first of all, I think they will seek to develop closer relations with each other, and then with countries such as Turkey and the European Union, the United States, China, and so on. But in order to save its positions in Central Asia, Russia would need to, I think, to win the war in Ukraine, which is very unlikely to happen, and to fundamentally change its foreign policy course, which also I don't see happening anytime soon, if at all.
Afghanistan is high on the list, as I mentioned earlier. Why is that an important issue for Russia?
I think it is more important for Tajikistan because it borders Afghanistan, and it does not have good relations with the de facto authorities in Kabul, the Taliban. And Tajikistan relies on Russian protection in the event of potential escalation of the situation in Afghanistan and potential incursion of certain radical elements into the Central Asian country. Although I don't think Russia is in a position to protect Tajikistan, but nevertheless, the situation in Afghanistan is important for Tajikistan, for Russia as well, because it fears that if the situation there in what is often described as the land of the graveyard of empires, if it deteriorates, then the Kremlin fears that its country will be in worse position, because it fears that there will be a lot of drugs available, and its market will be flooded with drugs, narcotics. So that's what the Kremlin fears. They're not hiding it, so they're trying to preserve stability in Afghanistan, which is why they're developing closer ties with the Taliban. They recognize the Taliban recently, and their leaders visited Moscow on several occasions. And I think Russia will continue developing good ties with the Taliban. They are the de facto rulers of Afghanistan, and that could impact to a certain extent relations between Dushanbe and Moscow, because Tajikistan still does not recognize the Taliban as rulers of Afghanistan.
Well, moving from good relations to now strained relations, Azerbaijan will be attending the CIS meeting on Thursday, which Putin is also going to be attending. But Azerbaijan has since distanced itself from Russia following strained relations. What does that mean for their future?
Well, according to reports, they could meet in Dushanbe, Putin and Aliyev. They spoke over the phone yesterday, I believe. President Aliyev called President Putin because it was Putin's birthday, so it was symbolic phone call, but for Russian, it is for Russia, it's very important. So I think they will most likely meet there and hold talks. Now, we will see in December, Moscow will organize an informal meeting of the CIS leaders in Moscow or St. Petersburg. So we'll see if President Aliyev attends there, if he agrees to travel to Moscow, then it will mean that the relations between the two countries have improved. If not, then it will probably mean that we will see some kind of escalation, not necessarily and almost certainly not military escalation, but maybe economic escalation or political. But for now, I see attempts from both sides to improve relations. Now, Russia would have to release members of Azerbaijani diaspora, and they expect Baku to release detained Russians. If that happens, then we could possibly see normalization of relations between Azerbaijan and Russia, although I don't think the relations between the two countries will ever be the same as they were in the past before this escalation. And as I said, that's the result of Russia's actions in Ukraine and also of its diplomacy.
And what do you think is likely to come out of the CIS leaders meeting happening tomorrow?
I think there will be a joint statement. They will, of course, not a single country will back Russia, at least publicly. They will not support Russia's actions in Ukraine. They will not condemn Ukraine or the West, so they will try to balance their ties with Moscow and with the West. Russia, of course, will try to improve bilateral ties with all these countries in Central Asia and the South Caucasus as well. But it will be just a formal statement, nothing significant in my view. Also, there will be a summit Russia-Central Asia, which is Russian attempt to do what other actors are already doing in Central Asia. Like we have Central Asia Plus forums where regional leaders meet with European leaders and Chinese and Turkish and so on. So Russia is trying to do the same because it's quite obvious that there's a strong competition in Central Asia as various global actors are trying to strengthen their presence in that energy-rich region. So Russia is no exception, but as I said, its positions there will depend on the outcome of the Ukraine war.
Thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Mikovic. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're now up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.